Summary of the things they carried by Tim O'Brien. There are 22 stories in The Things They Carried that are based on the author's memories of his time as a soldier in the Vietnam War. Even though O'Brien says in the book that the lines between fantasy and fact aren't always clear, the characters' names are based on real people. It lacks a plot because it is a collection of stories rather than a novel. Despite this, the collection works as a whole because it stays true to its ideas and characters. The Things They Carried lets the reader meet Lieutenant Jimmy Cross, who is in charge of O'Brien's platoon. Cross is in love with a girl named Martha after just one date in college. The story jumps between Cross's feelings for Martha, the death of soldier Ted Lavender, and a list of everything the soldiers carried to war, from goods to Lucky Charms to feelings. Jimmy Cross goes to see Tim O'Brien a long time after the war is over, and over a bottle of gin, they tell each other war stories. Cross tells her that he still loves her when they talk about Martha. He talks about meeting Martha at a college gathering after the war. She had never been married. Cross wants Martha to read the story and find him, so he asks O'Brien to write one about him that makes him sound like the best platoon leader ever. Spin, a story about Tim O'Brien's war memories that are all over the place. Mitchell Sanders sends his home draft board his body lice. There is checkers every night between Norman Boker and Henry Dobbins. Kathy, O'Brien's daughter, says he should not write so many war tales. O'Brien remembers that Kiowa taught Rat Kiley and Dave Jensen how to do a rain dance. Azar blew up the puppy that Ted Lavender got. Kiowa told O'Brien that the armed man on the road had to be killed. O'Brien says he has to write stories because then there will be nothing left to remember. Before he goes to Vietnam, Tim O'Brien chooses to avoid the draft. He drives north to Canada and stops at the Tip Top Lodge, which is owned by an old man called Elroy Birtle. O'Brien says that Birtle was the hero of his life. O'Brien stays at the lodge for 6 days while he thinks about whether to run away. He is only a few yards from Canadian land when Birtle takes him out on a boat. Instead of being afraid of dying, O'Brien is afraid of making himself and his family look bad, so he has to go to war. Lee Strunk and Dave Jensen get into a terrible fight over a stolen jackknife, and Jensen breaks Strunk's nose. When Strunk comes back from a few days of medical care, Jensen starts to think that Strunk will kill him as revenge. Jensen locks himself away for a week. Eventually, he loses it and starts shooting his gun into the air until he runs out of bullets. He then uses a gun to break his own nose and asks Strunk if they're even. "They are," says Strunk. "Friends." After their fight, Dave Jensen and Lee Strunk become friends and do everything together. The deal they make in sign says that if one of them gets hurt so badly in fight that they can't walk, the other has to kill them. At the end of that month, Strunk is in battle and loses most of his right leg. While the troops wait for an aid helicopter, Strunk asks Jensen not to kill him over and over again. Jensen says he won't do it. Strunk dies in the helicopter, and Jensen looks happy about it. In How to Tell a True War Story, O'Brien says that war stories don't teach anything and are usually not true, at least not fully. You can tell if a story is true by the questions people ask about it after it's been told. For example, O'Brien talks about Rat Kiley's reaction to Kurt Lemon's death. He also talks about Mitchell Sanders' story about a group of soldiers who started hearing voices. When O'Brien tells the story of Lemon's death, an older woman will often say, "It's too sad." This makes O'Brien decide that he needs to keep telling the stories and adding to them to make them more true. The Dentist, a short story, praises Kurt Lemon, a soldier that Tim O'Brien didn't like because of how manly he seemed. Lemon liked fighting and was known for doing dangerous things, but he was scared of the army dentist that every man had to see. Lemon passed out when the doctor touched him. He was so drunk and angry with himself that he didn't wake up for the rest of the day. Lemon woke up the doctor in the middle of the night and made him pull out a perfectly healthy tooth. This is Tra Bang. O'Brien tells a story that Rat Kiley told him when he was stationed in a remote place. Because there wasn't much going on, one man named Mark Fossey flew his girlfriend Mary and Belle in by chopper. But things don't go as planned for Fossey because Belle falls in love with the war, leaves Fossey, and joins the Green Berets in battle. Stockings Henry Dobbins, a kind and lovable giant, had a strange habit of putting his girlfriend's stockings around his neck before going on dangerous missions. When Dobbins stepped on a mine that didn't go off while he was under heavy fire, his platoon started to believe in the power of the socks. At first, they made fun of him, but then they started to respect him. He still wears the socks after his lady breaks up with him and says, "The magic didn't leave." Church. For a week, the platoon makes use of a pagoda where 2 monks live as a base of operations. The 2 monks like the men, but Henry Dobbins is their favorite. He tells Kiowa that he might become a monk after the war, but he knows he could never be a priest because he can't deal with the tough issues of life and death. Kiowa, who always has the New Testament with her, doesn't think it's right that they're staying at a church. Says the same thing about "the man I killed." The story jumps back and forth between O'Brien's memories of the young, armed man he threw a grenade at on a road outside of Mikey and the story he has made up about the dead man as a scientist, scholar, and scared soldier. Kiowa keeps telling O'Brien to stop looking at the body and talk to her. Kathleen O'Brien, O'Brien's daughter, asks him if he's ever killed anyone. He lies and says he hasn't, but he tells the story to Kathleen as an adult and says he will tell the truth. He remembers the young man standing outside of Mikey and how the memory still bothers him. But in his mind, the young man keeps going down the road and makes it. Style. A young Vietnamese girl dances in the burned-out remains of her village. Azar keeps asking her why she's moving. The bodies of the girl's family are found from where her house used to be. She dances even more. After the troops have left the town, Azar dances like the girl to make fun of her. Dobbins grabs Azar and holds him over a well, telling him he will drop him if he doesn't dance right. Speaking of courage, it follows Norman Boker around his house after he gets back from the war on July 4, 1945. Boker keeps driving around a lake near his home, thinking about the night Kiowa died. He saw Kiowa's boot and tried to pull it off, but Kiowa was too stuck, so Boker ran away. He is sure that if he had pulled Kiowa out, he would have won the Silver Star and Kiowa would still be living. Boker doesn't have anyone to talk to, and he thinks about telling his dad that he was a wimp. He thinks of his father comforting him by telling him about all the medals he did win. Boker gets in the water and stands there to watch the fireworks. Notes: this is an addendum to the story Speaking of Courage. In the beginning of Speaking of Courage, Norman Boker sent O'Brien a 17-page letter in which he asked him to write a story about a man who feels like he died in the war. O'Brien feels bad about himself and has to do what he's asked. He writes a version of Speaking of Courage that he sends to Boker and gets published, but he's not really proud of it. Boker doesn't like the story because it wasn't told the truth about what happened to Kiowa in Vietnam and was changed to fit into O'Brien's book. O'Brien thinks that the story will show how he failed to protect Kiowa and how brave Boker was. It tells the story of the search to find Kiowa, who was buried under the mud after being killed by enemy rocket fire. Lieutenant Jimmy Cross feels guilty about killing Kiowa, which makes him determined to write a letter to Kiowa's father. The young soldier, O'Brien, thinks he killed Kiowa by shining his flashlight on him in the dark to show him a picture of his girlfriend, and it is the men of the platoon who eventually pull Kiowa out. Good form. O'Brien plays with the idea of truth in stories and how there are different types of truth in stories, especially war stories. There is truth in stories and truth in events. He says he wouldn't be lying if he said he killed the young man outside of Mikey or if he said he didn't. O'Brien takes his daughter Kathleen, who is 10 years old, to Vietnam with him on a field trip. Their guide helps them understand as they go to the field where Kiowa died. The field doesn't look the same as O'Brien remembers it. He wades into the water and buries Kiowa's four-legged shoes where he thinks Kiowa's pack was found. His daughter Kathleen asks him about the old farmer who is looking at him. She thinks he looks angry, but O'Brien tells her that it's over. O'Brien talks about the 2 bullets he caught in Vietnam in The Ghost Soldiers. The first bullet hit Rat Kiley right away, and the second one almost killed him because Bobby Jorgensen, the new doctor, was shocked while the platoon was under fire. O'Brien wants to get back at Jorgensen, but Azar is the only one who can help him scare the doctor. They try to scare Jorgensen one night by acting like the enemy, but Jorgensen isn't scared, and O'Brien has to let go of his anger when they make peace. Night Life, a story told by someone else about how Rat Kiley shot himself in the foot to avoid doing his job. The group only worked by walking at night because they had heard that the enemy was about to attack. It had an effect on everyone, but Rat Kiley began to lose it. Officer Jimmy Cross told the helicopter that took him away that he had shot his foot by accident. The Lives of the Dead, O'Brien says that his time in Vietnam is like the death of his childhood friend, Linda, who had a brain tumor and died when she was 9. O'Brien had never seen a dead body before she was hers. He says that stories keep the people in them alive, which means Linda can live on forever.
About the author. Tim O'Brien was born in Austin, Minnesota on October 1, 1946. When he was 12, he moved to Worthington, Minnesota with his family. This is where many of the stories in The Things They Carried and other of his books take place. In 1968, he graduated from Macalester College with a BA in political science. He joined the Army in 1968 and was sent to Vietnam, where he served until 1970. He went to graduate school at Harvard University after coming back from the war. His first book, a biography called If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home, came out in 1973. O'Brien won the National Book Award in 1979 for his book Going After Cacciato. However, The Things They Carried, a collection of stories that are loosely based on his own life, may be the work that he is most famous for. He has written many more books, and many of them are about the Vietnam War and how it changed the lives of those who fought.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.